All right. Welcome to the Citizen Assembly open meeting. I'm Stacy Gustafson, your host, and I have with me Dan Bader, retired Chicago Department of Health. And he is going to discuss with us tonight how to manage and understand the emotions of sadness and shame, which are associated with clinical depression. Thank you so much, Dan. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. So when a person is suffering from depression, usually there'll be a lot of awareness of feeling down, feeling sad, lacking energy. Sometimes there'll be some suicidal ideation that can come to the forefront. There's a number of symptoms that a person feels. Sometimes people will say, well, I just don't have any more pleasure in life. I don't enjoy anything. There's nothing for me, etc. So I'm going to go to a diagram of the emotion of sadness. And let me see if I've got it here. Oh, that's shame. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm getting all the other emotions which you might experience in a depression. Okay. So now we have sadness. And if you look at the diagram, at the top, we have the circle which says loss. And that's what triggers the emotion of sadness. Now, we have lots of different types of losses. I'm going to go into that in some detail. But this diagram says you suffer a loss. You then will feel sadness, and you may feel other emotions in addition to sadness. You may feel anger, anxiety, shame, which we're going to talk about. But sadness is a very, very important emotion. And if you look at the diagram, as you go the line directly down from the sadness circle, says urges acceptance of permanent loss. So what I'm saying is that sadness is an emotion that we have, it's hardwired, and it's there to get us to accept a permanent loss, such as a loved one passes away, we lose a job, we lose our money, we lose all sorts of things, and we're going to go into a lot of those. But basically, Dan, yes.
Can you see when I raise my hand, or do I need to interrupt?
No, I can see it perfectly. I see it. Yes.
I was just wondering, so loss and sadness, it has a purpose for us? Because I kind of feel like sadness, we should avoid that at all costs.
No, definitely not. The sadness is all of the emotional energies. I talk about 5 different emotional energies. Someone else may talk about 8. I've seen things from years ago, 16. You can divide it up in different ways, but this is fairly effective. So we're talking about the emotion of sadness in response to a loss. Now, what sadness wants us to do is to accept a permanent loss. Off at the angles, one is labeled hopelessness, the other helplessness. These are the thoughts that accompany sadness. So, sadness wants to give us thoughts of hopelessness and helplessness to get back what it is we've lost, in order that we just come to a place of acceptance. We're going to grieve. Most people are going to grieve a loss one way or the other. And then in the end of the day, if it's not something we can get back, that we can recover, resurrect, then we need to accept it. We don't want to become caught up in endless obsessions over losing something that we really can't get back. It takes away all of our focus and attention, and that should be directed elsewhere on goals. And yes.
So I'm kind of thinking about if somebody is feeling sadness, it brings up to me that sometimes, well, on the one hand, we want to avoid sadness, but then if you have a loss, it feels like, well, you should dwell on that in some instances. Like, is it ever, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do, Stacy. You know, here's the thing. So we have to manage the emotion, right? That's the thing. We don't want to, and so let me go to the next slide. Oh God, sorry about that. Let me, okay. So here we have a slide where it says sadness, the emotion we experience due to a loss, loss of attachment object, like a loved one, loss of status, loss of autonomy, freedom, are all salient sadness triggers. It urges us to reflexively view losses as permanent. That's the hardwired bias, because that's what it's for. It generates thoughts of hopelessness and helplessness in order to urge the acceptance of a permanent loss. It normally makes us feel depleted in order to conserve emotional energy. Sadness wants us to give up in order to go forward. If a loss is permanent, it is necessary to accept it and conserve our very finite supply of emotional energy. Our energy needs to be devoted to the recovery of temporary losses or the pursuit of goals. Yes, Stacy.
That was it. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So the key here is a loss we suffer permanent or not? This is a key thing to understand. So here is a sadness timeout, you know, kind of modeled after an anger timeout or any emotion timeout. So during a sadness timeout, we need to determine if the loss we are responding to is permanent, temporary, or it's a future goal that has been mistakenly identified as a permanent loss. That's a task that has to be considered and implemented. In other words, yes, Stacy.
Can you give an example of the future goal thing?
Yeah, well, sure. So a lot of times, let's take, I have some examples. Let's take a relationship breakup, okay? So a relationship is broken up, and a lot of times what will happen is the person, let's say they accept the breakup, they understand that the person they've been attached to, connected to, is no longer available to them. And so a future goal in this situation might be to, maybe I could get another relationship in the future, but not the person that I just separated from, divorced from, broke up with, that kind of thing. Now, a future goal could be getting that relationship. Now, oftentimes somebody will start to go to a place where they're saying to themselves, oh, you know, I've lost this person. It's breaking my heart. And, you know, that can start to morph into, I can't have any more relationships. You know, there's no more relationship, that I could never replace the person. It can manifest in different ways. A person could come to a conclusion for all sorts of reasons that they could not maybe obtain a new career, that they could actually do something different than what they've been doing. That would be a future goal. But sometimes it's very easy. The danger with any emotional state is if you start to have repetitive thoughts, like for example, let's say someone has passed away, and the person starts to say to themselves, I do anything to be able to have this person back. Okay, so at a certain point in time, that kind of thinking, the extreme pain can easily morph into, again, there's nobody else who could replace this person for me. I can't have this again. I would argue that that is a mistake. There's a future goal. You could have another relationship, and that's maybe at a certain point where you need to put your energy, if it's important to you to have a relationship to replace what it is you've lost. And you can say the same thing about a job loss. If you get fired from your job, or you get laid off, or the business shuts down, we have to keep in mind that we could get another job. We may not be able to have the one we wished we had, but we don't want to make the mistake of thinking, that's it, I'm through, there's nothing I can do to get a relationship or to get a new job. Because if you think that enough times, the danger, especially in depression, is that it will crystallize into a belief. In other words, a belief, well, I can't have a relationship. And that might be justified by the person saying to themselves, I'm just not, I don't know how to socialize well enough. I'm not attractive enough. A person could come up with all sorts of reasons that they're using to justify the idea that they can't have another relationship. But what can happen is, if you repeat that over and over again, the thought can start to crystallize into a belief. Once it's a belief, and I'm going to give some typical sadness beliefs, once that happens, it's not easy to get rid of it. It's not, because once you have a belief, it's meant to be kind of a permanent guide in your mind brain. So we have to, be aware of that and be careful. So you see in a depressive conclusion that the future is hopeless. This happens all the time, in a depression. Somebody's depressed, they start to believe, well, because of their own deficiencies, because the way the world is set up, it doesn't really matter, but what they've concluded is they have no future. That's a very dangerous belief to have, because if you believe you don't have a future, well, then you might say to yourself, well, then I don't really have anything to lose. So I don't really need to check my behavior in a lot of ways. It's not where someone wants to go to, or you could, it very frequently leads to suicidal ideation. I mean, if I don't have a future, there's nothing for me, and all I'm going to have is this pain, this endless emotional pain, I just as soon take myself out, so we have to be really careful with sadness that we don't allow it to crystallize the hopelessness and helplessness kinds of thoughts. And everybody's an individual. Everybody's going to have their own repertoire of thoughts and ideas depending on, time, where are you living? What historical time frame is it? There's all sorts of things that go into what these thoughts might be. So let me move to, so this is a loss of attachment object. This is a very common kind of a loss that we have to look at. So I'm saying there, the loss of an attachment object can trigger sadness, anxiety, shame, and anger, all of which must be adaptively managed. All of them. The loss of an attachment object can be permanent or temporary. That's a key thing. That's managing sadness. Is this permanent, temporary, or am I actually looking at something which I could achieve in the future and identifying it as a permanent loss under the sadness bias? Now, when I'm saying here, endogenous opioids and oxytocin are released when an attachment is secure and present. We feel good when we've got a nice attachment. We feel more relaxed and stable. Love and trust are terms which frequently denote the state of secure attachment, just to give a sense of it. When sadness is dominant, opioid and dopamine activity is decreased. And dopamine activity is what I associate, well, it is associated with the emotional state of interest, excitement, attention, enthusiasm. So when sadness is dominating, opioid and dopamine activity is decreased. When a loss occurs, there is a normal desire/need for reunion. And this can lead to suicidal ideation when a loved one has passed away. So, if someone has passed away or a relationship is pretty much objectively irreparable, we have to be careful because, again, suicidal ideation, which usually, is about, I can't stand the pain, there's nothing for me to look forward to, and I'm going to take myself out. Sometimes anger can be part of it. Sometimes people will say, I'm going to take myself out because I don't see I have a future and the pain is too great, but I'm also going to make my parents suffer. They deserve it. So I'm taking myself out. People differ greatly. Everybody's an individual, but there are some general things that we have to understand about this place, this state. So finally, possessions frequently become attachment objects. We see this with the people who tend to become hoarders. So that for people who are hoarders, it's very common. Their stuff, their items, take on a life of their own, so to speak. Okay, so that's loss of attachment object. That's a very common kind of loss. Next, we have loss of freedom. So the loss of freedom, and then I have in parentheses, autonomy, self-determination, can trigger sadness, anxiety, shame, and anger, all of which must be adaptively managed. The loss of freedom can be temporary or permanent. Important thing. The loss of freedom can precipitate and maintain learned helplessness behavior. Now, some of you may be familiar with learned helplessness. It's a theory of depression that a psychologist named Martin Seligman developed back in I think it was the 1970s. It was quite, it was considered very, very creative and interesting back in those days. It's kind of gone by the wayside for a number of reasons. But learned helplessness was originally, there were experiments with rats where they would put a rat in a cage or an enclosure, and the rat would get intermittent shocks to its feet. And they'd set it up so the rat really could not escape or predict or control the shocks. At that point, the rat didn't try to escape the enclosure anymore, didn't run around all, having anxiety, fight kind of reaction. It just simply lay down and pretty much didn't do anything. It gave up. And that's what they call learned helplessness. You've tried to solve things, you've done everything you can, but nothing you do works. You just don't know what to do, or there is nothing to do. And that's called learned helplessness. And the loss of freedom can certainly induce that. The loss of freedom can precipitate and maintain submissive behavior. So when a person is in a loss of freedom situation, such as being incarcerated in certain ways, this can cause somebody to become very submissive. Now, this can happen, a loss of freedom can be just a child in a very abusive family. You might as well be incarcerated and getting brutalized. But loss of freedom can precipitate and maintain submissive behavior. Now, the learned helplessness and submissive behaviors that often manifest in tyrannical environments are sometimes viewed as adaptive in terms of ultimate survival. And we can say that too about, other types of environments. And certainly a lot of families are very tyrannical. And if you're a child, you're not going anywhere, and you're trapped. If you're incarcerated, especially if it's a country or someplace where literally it is a tyrannical, kind of a government, being submissive or kind of being depressed, learned helplessness type of thing can be adaptive in that kind of situation, because there's always a chance that the environment will change at some point. Maybe you're going to get out of the family. You're going to get out of prison. You're going to get out of, the tyrannical government. Things can change. And so people who like to look at psychology and mental health from an evolutionary point of view will often bring this up in terms of loss of freedom and adaptation. So let me go to, now we have loss of status, another common loss situation. So again, the loss of status can trigger sadness, anxiety, shame, and anger, all of which must be adaptively managed. And from the framework I use for mental health, the 3 building blocks, the 3 building blocks being emotion management, the setting of interpersonal, intrapersonal boundaries, and taking care of our basic human needs. All of these things need to be put in place. So, all of the emotions need to be managed. Now, loss of status is frequently a temporary loss. The loss of status may require adaptive setting of appropriate interpersonal and intrapersonal boundaries on disrespectful judgments / criticisms that follow the loss. We know we can be our own worst enemy. If I've suffered some, embarrassment and it's affected my status at work or something of this nature, I can really start to beat myself up and really almost hate myself. We have to be careful, because again, you don't want to do that to yourself, because not only does it keep you emotionally dysregulated, it can lead to the crystallization of beliefs. And that's, in mental health, beliefs are one of the most important things to understand, because once you have a belief, if I, beat myself up all the time, I'm a loser, I'm a weakling, I'm this, that. at a certain point, depending on, how suggestible I am in a way, that's going to become a belief. And then it's really hard for me to get rid of it. It's much easier to get rid of before it becomes, a belief. And often, and a lot of times when people get into chronic mental health problem situations, they've got a lot of beliefs they've crystallized off of emotional places that are very, very hard to unpack, but it has to be done. So we want to remember, so judgments, whether rendered respectfully or disrespectfully, are very reinforcing. So here's something which, again, is kind of important, I think, to understand. So when we render a judgment on someone else, oh, look at that person. They don't have their act together at all, or that person messed up. When we do that, we get a little reinforcement. It kind of feels good to be the one who's the judge and rendering the judgments, and again, almost on a hardwired level, that there's reasons for that. But we also have to remember that when we self-criticize in a disrespectful way, attacking our identity, that's also reinforcing. So I'm the one who's doing the judging. Dan, you're just nothing but a loser. All right. So in that little angry put down of myself, I get a reinforcement, the part that's doing the judging, and then the part that gets the judgment has to suffer the shame, from that. And again, we want to be very, very aware. Now so I emphasize judgments, whether rendered respectfully or disrespectfully, are very reinforcing. A respectful judgment is not usually that much of a problem. Of course, you never know how somebody's going to react. So if someone attacks our identity, and what do I mean by identity? Our identity, our gender identity, our identity as a man, a woman, whatever, our identity, gender-wise, our race, our religion, our appearance, our intellect, ethnicity, whatever. When an attack on someone's identity is rendered, it's going to be taken as disrespectful. We may, and that means that there's going to be a reaction. A reaction is going to come from that, which probably will be very conflictual. So we want to be able to set limits on somebody who's doing that. So if somebody says to me, Dan, I can't stand the way you look. I don't like your voice. I don't like the way you talk. Whatever. I don't like you. All right. So I have to be able to set a boundary with that person. Basically, what I would recommend when I was working, doing therapy, I would pretty much recommend that the person who's being disrespectful, they're not giving us a constructive criticism in a decent way. We have to ask them not to repeat that judgment or that criticism. I would say to somebody when they'd have, I'd just say, look, I get it. You don't like my opinion. You don't like the way I think or whatever, but I'd really appreciate it if you don't repeat that to me. Believe me, I'm not going to forget your criticism. We're pretty good at remembering that kind of stuff. Again, for good reasons. So we have to set an interpersonal boundary on disrespect. The same thing applies if somebody is making threats, or obviously if somebody is turning to violence. We absolutely have to have a boundary there. And if a person won't respect our boundaries, then ultimately we have to distance ourselves from that person if we can. And there's some other things we can do. But I just wanted to, and as I say there, if our boundary is not respected, we need to limit communication with the person or take other measures if this option is not available. And then finally, if we attack ourselves in a disrespectful manner, we need to place an intrapersonal boundary on the repetition of the insult. This usually entails expressing the self-criticism in a respectful, compassionate fashion. So again, yes, Stacy.
So have you found that people are able to do that?
Yeah, no, they definitely can do it. And they'll end up getting a good, you'll end up getting a, well, you know, look, another person, I mean, obviously, you know, there's plenty of people, if somebody attacks your identity in some sort of a way, that's going to hurt, right? Because these are things about yourself which you really can't change very easily, if at all. So we have to be able to set that boundary. Now, if we set the boundary in a disrespectful fashion, like, you know, if you ever say that to me again, I'm going to blow your brains out. Or if you know, this kind of thing, or, you know, I'll beat you within an inch of your life. If we make remarks like that to a person when we're setting a boundary, that probably isn't going to go too well. I mean, you know, just easy to understand it. Yes.
I guess I was kind of wondering about myself, the self-criticism in my head. I mean, I've tried for years to stop that, but it seems to be somebody else doing that.
Yeah, well, but here's, you know, so what we have, you have to put the brakes on it. You have to, because it's coming from frustration a lot of the time. You didn't do something the way you wanted to, you didn't pull it off, you know, and so the initial attack is from anger, and anger instinctively is disrespectful. So it probably is going to, you know, it starts, but you can put the brakes on it if you're aware. You know, you can tell, you know, I can say to myself, shut up, Dan, you know, stop it. And then I need to reword the criticism. You know, yeah, you know, you just didn't prepare yourself appropriately. Yes, sir. Yeah.
But sometimes I think personal. Can you hear me?
That, I'm
Yeah.
sorry?
I think, yeah. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you. Yes.
Can you hear me? All
Yes.
right. Sometimes I think personal criticisms are like one does it unconsciously. Like sometimes I can be in school and I'll respond to something, and then later on I'll be thinking about it, and I'll be like, you weren't supposed to do that. For instance, somebody will come to me with their assignment for me to do it for them, and in ideal sense, I believe that when you bring your assignment that you are not able to do, for me to do it for you, don't just come and give it to me and walk away. You should sit with me so that and learn how to do it with me, so that next time you'll be able to do it on your own, because you are not in the school just to learn how to do assignments and go away.
Okay. So you're saying, if I understand,
one day you are going to be put into the real life, into the field to work. That means you are going to be affecting the lives of people.
Stacy, were you able to understand what was just said? I'm hearing you, but I'm having a little trouble understanding it.
What I understood is that he'll have people come to him and say, do this assignment for me. And he has the response that no, they should sit and learn with him how to do it, rather than just drop it on him and run away. Is that right, Abdul?
Is that what you're saying?
We might have lost him. The internet connection is very bad.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit hard, but yeah, if that of course is perfectly reasonable. The thing is that in terms of setting boundaries, we have to create our own scripts for situations that are very predictable, that happen repetitively with people, and be prepared to do it. And again, if somebody's angry, what's likely to come out of their mouths is going to be kind of disrespectful. And so, the anger needs to be managed, of course, but just to realize when we get upset with ourselves, it's going to be coming from a place of anger. And we need to just put the brakes on it and then reform it. Say that I was supposed to, prepare a project at work or something, and I didn't do it on time. I knew I procrastinated, I messed up. And so now I'm upset with myself, and, I could, go and start hitting my head. You'll never learn what, blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, I need to put the brakes on and just simply state it in a kind of sober way, a sober, stoic kind of way. I procrastinated. That's a problem I have. I need to try to correct it and improve myself. And I have to deal with the consequences of messing up here. That's it. And that's not what's going to happen naturally or instinctively. So we have to practice the scripts that we write for ourselves to handle these situations. And after you do, it's just like muscle memory or anything, after a while, it becomes easier. But it's not something which is just going to happen. The work has to be put in to it. So let me go to, what do we have next here? Okay, so here we have some common sadness generated beliefs. I have no future. No one cares about me. I'm ineffectual and powerless. I need to commit suicide. Well, if it reaches the status of a belief, it's a huge problem. Because when we believe something, what happens to our mind is we can recall all information that we have in our mind brain that, should I hit admit?
I got it.
Oh, you got it? Okay. So we're going to come up with all the information, welcome back, all the information that we have to support the belief. We're not going to have easy access to any information in our memory banks that contravene, go against the belief. That's the power of a belief, because a belief is something that we have, it's similar to making a decision, but it's more powerful than just making a decision. A belief is there so that we can take action in the world without being paralyzed and disrupted. So, for example, if I have a belief that I need to commit suicide, which is not a good place, obviously nobody should get there, but they do. I need to commit suicide. There's nothing else for me. Well, that means that I'll be able to think of every reason under the sun that I have stored in my mind that justifies that belief that I need to commit suicide. And I will not be able to easily access information I have that says, maybe that's not a very good idea, really. Not very good. And that's not to say, there might not be certain very, very unusual, maybe not, circumstances where someone could rationally say, I need to commit suicide. I don't know, I'm 86 years old. I'm racked up in pain from whatever medical conditions I have. I do not have religious beliefs which tell me I can't do that. In a situation like that, someone may rationally say, I think I do need to commit suicide for my own good and for the good of my loved ones. We don't need to drag this on for 3 more years or something of that nature. So there are certain circumstances where maybe you know it's rash, but most of the time it's not going to be like that. And so we have to appreciate, you know, I mean, think of so many people, the vast majority of people in the world, when they're very young children, they get socialized into a religion. And a religion, you know, teaches you a set of beliefs, some of which make sense, I guess, are practical in some ways. But when you have religious beliefs, you're not going to let those go very easily, if ever at all. They're imprinted. Beliefs are imprinted. And so we can't do much about what we get imprinted with when we're young. And a lot of times what we get taught or what we believe is workable in the world. But we have to remember, certainly, once we're at a certain age where we can critically think about things, we have to be careful and not indulge ourselves in all sorts of emotional drama, you know, where we just keep thinking these kinds of thoughts about ourselves or others, and they become crystallized as beliefs because you can't walk it back very easily. So these are some sadness-generated beliefs. And you know, what I used to do when I was doing therapy, sometimes I didn't with some people, I would go ahead and I'd take 3 containers, and they'd be talking about, you know, something, some loss. And I would ask them to, you know, I'd have 3 containers, 1 for permanent losses, 1 for temporary losses, 1 for future goals that, you know, have nothing to do with a permanent loss because the future hasn't even happened. I mean, and then I would, you know, ask them to sort some things out. And it takes a certain kind of repetition. You know, I mean, what I'm giving to you is psychoeducational content. And it usually, you know, I've done many presentations over the years, and usually people are pretty much able to understand what I'm trying to convey. But just understanding it or appreciating it, you have to do the work. You know, you just simply have to do the work, or you won't be able to get control over very powerful, instinctual, emotional energies. Okay, so sadness is what, yes, Stacy.
So when it does get that ingrained, is it again those chemical paths that are formed? Is that part of it?
Well, you know, I'm not sure that you know, there's certain neurological pathways or locations that people have over the years associated with beliefs. Now, you know, a belief is going to be part of our memory bank. You know, I mean, it's there. You know, for example, I believe in a, you know, omniscient, omnipotent God. That's a very common belief that people have. That's there. Now, if you ask them, well, where did you get that belief? And, you know, it'll be, well, I was taught it, you know, if they really have to think about it. You know, my parents taught me or something of this nature. But but again, we're hardwired to crystallize things into beliefs so that we don't become paralyzed when we have to do something. You know, and you can say the same thing about decisions. Once you've made a decision, okay, that's what I'm doing, I'm in. Then you can go forward without being, you know, should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? Is it right? Is it wrong? But we have to respect the power of both making a decision, which is much easier to reverse than a belief. You know, for example, I encounter people, you know, with all of the political stuff that's been going on for a number of years. So, you know, I often say to people, you know, in 2016, I supported Bernie Sanders. You know, so in 2016, I was supporting Bernie Sanders. But based on behaviors that I saw him exhibit after, you know, being in the campaign, I changed my opinion of Bernie Sanders. I had made a decision to support him, but I could pretty much change my mind. I'm not supporting him in the future. You know, sorry. I learned some things about Bernie that I didn't know. And I could say the same thing. It was the same thing in 2008. I was originally supporting Hillary Clinton. And I learned some things about Hillary Clinton, and I changed my mind, you know, about her based on new information and new understandings. So we can change up decisions in a way that we can't do so easily with a belief. So a lot of times you'll see somebody who is committed to Bernie Sanders, and it's almost like Bernie would have to shoot somebody, you know, in order for them to change their mind about the guy, you know, because they believe he's good and all of that. And so, you know, the beliefs are very, very powerful mind controlling entities. And usually what you have to do to unpack or get rid of a belief is you have to, first of all, say to yourself, I'm going to look at the information that goes against, that contravenes my belief. I have to look at it. I have to open up to it. And then I have to be aware that anything that contravenes my belief, I'm going to automatically minimize it or rationalize it away. So I have to catch myself when I start doing that. Yes, Stacy.
Yeah, that was a really big point for me that I learned from you, that my brain is wired to hear the things that I have chosen to believe in. And that makes, it was so eye-opening to me that I could understand now why I get so upset when somebody says something that I don't believe in. And just knowing that helps me understand it's a brain thing. It's not my personal issue. And then knowing that I can fix it.
Yeah, and also, you know, to have empathy, although it's hard, with the other person when they have their beliefs, which that doesn't make any sense to me at all. I don't know how you could believe that, you know, that kind of thing. To understand that that's a belief they have, and really the only way they're going to get rid of it is to, you know, do the work, look at the contravening evidence, and also be aware that they're going to rationalize or minimize it away. Yes.
Abdul has a question?
Yes, Abdul, please.
You know, I just like Stacy mentioned, I have been here for a very long time, and I was born in this country. You know, so I saw the situation as it is going on here, and I become so upset when I see people engaging in corruption or engaging out of corruption and trying to promote it, or people when I see people living so cool with corruption, they don't see anything wrong with it. They don't see anything wrong with taking something that belongs to all for themselves. I get so upset, and sometimes I don't know. I feel like maybe is this some kind of beliefs that I am having of my own. It is just my mind that is not willing to compromise just because the situation is tough. I've kind of asked myself that question most of the time.
So, you know, there's a couple of things to consider. When we encounter, say, corruption, when we look at people who are corrupt, and usually they're going to be dishonest also. So those individuals, because they're treating us in a unfair, if you're corrupt, you're going to be engaging in some unfairness, and it's disrespectful also. So we get angry at the person. But here's the thing. So when we get angry, we're going to see that person, because of the anger, as being essentially all bad. That's the nature of anger, because anger wants us to be able to attack, to fight, to literally, the purest expression of anger is to physically assault somebody, and so usually when we get angry, if we don't know how to manage it, we're either going to go to physical violence, we're going to go to threats of violence, or we're going to attack somebody's identity. And, that can vary depending on who we're angry at, et cetera, et cetera. So think about beliefs that are formed in anger. It's like when soldiers are being trained to go into combat against an enemy, right? Usually, who's the enemy? Well, another group of some kind, whether it's a country or whatever. So the soldiers are expected to be able to kill the enemy. That's a pretty strong form of violence. Now, in order to get them to do that, there's usually directly or indirectly, there's going to be a kind of a educational component, a propaganda component, to make you hate that group. You'll be told how awful they are, how, and so once that is repeated over and over again, it makes it, then there will be a belief. That group of people are just totally evil. They don't deserve to live. Therefore, I'm going to, go ahead and participate in killing them. And that's not to say there aren't other motivations, that get involved, but so once it becomes a belief, and they can do that in a society. But some of that, I won't go into it here because of the time and everything, but really a lot of that is unfortunately happening in the environment we have in the United States today, and it's very, very dangerous. People don't, so many people do not appreciate it. But so, yes, Stacy.
So with Abdul, and let's say that these people they truly are corrupt. They're doing things really wrong and they're hurting people. And so the anger is justified, but then what do you do?
Well, the anger is justified. I mean, certainly, anger is justified. The real issue becomes, what are we going to do as a result of the anger? And a lot of times, what happens is people will, in essence, try to set boundaries on the behavior. Why do we even have a legal system? Even if it's corrupt now, in our country, it's gotten pretty corrupt as politics have. But the thing is, why do we have a legal system? We have a legal system so disputes between people, when they feel they're being treated unfairly or disrespectfully, get resolved without people having to go to violence and endless vengeance, right? I mean, and you see that even over in Afghanistan, where it's basically mostly a tribal society where you have different tribes, and how do they settle things up in the tribes? The same kind of a thing. They have a mechanism where disputes are settled, and some older members of the tribe who are established leaders will make a decision, taking into consideration the rules and the expectations, and trying to be fair. I mean, so yes, there's lots that gets us angry, And unfortunately, yes, Stacy.
So is there, in that instance, I mean, we're talking about, we've seen corruption, our systems for taking care of that are not working. Now what?
Well, we see a lot of things happening, but from my point of view, just talking now, just on a practical level, the biggest problem that I see, unfortunately, is that the corporate media, which dominates most of the information about the world or anything to most people, and I'm at least in the United States, and it's true in other places also. But what happens is, the corporate media, the people we see on cable TV, or if you read the New York Times or we tend to take what they say as being true. In other words, they become like substitute parents. We don't know what, most people don't even know what's going on in the world. Like I've used before, you ask somebody, do you know where Afghanistan is? Usually no. Do you know what kind of people live there? No. Or they might, do you know that we've been at war in Afghanistan since 2001? And people, so if you don't know something about the world, you yourself haven't read books, or you haven't studied or researched things. You don't have access to other news sources than just the corporate media, say here in the United States. What happens is you get programmed with beliefs that you take away from the media. And I would say one of the most personally difficult things that I've had to, maybe I'm exaggerating, but when Donald Trump got elected as president, most of the people that I've been associated with, connected, during my adult life, are what would be termed more progressive people. So with Donald Trump, who to me just seemed like, an odd person to even be running for president, given his history. But nonetheless, he gets elected, I believe, because he had certain messages that really resonated with a good portion of the population, having to do with, the outsourcing of jobs and the foreign regime change wars. But in any case, he gets elected, and then the corporate media took this guy who was, and they blew him up into this national fetish object, this endless piñata that they beat up day after day after day. That's all there was. And I felt like that was done, it was clever. It's not that Trump was a good guy or something. He was he had a certain history. It was very clear that he was a, sociopathic guy, like so many of them. But they blew him up into, he's the second coming of Hitler. He's a Nazi. He's, endless. And what that did was it took everybody's focus away from other things that were actually going on that maybe were more problematic than one guy like Donald Trump could ever be. And the power of, and so what would happen to me is I might say to one of my friends, I'd say, I think Trump got elected because he had some pretty good messaging, and he was pretty good at working a certain kind of audience and crowd, actually. He was talented in that way. But then it would be like, I would be attacked as I support Donald Trump. And I said, I don't support Donald Trump. To me, he's a sociopath on the make. He's a predator. He wants more power, more money, and basically to be the dominant predator. He wants to be the predator of predators. That's what motivates someone like him. And I could say that, but it wouldn't sink in. They couldn't differentiate between you know, my opinion and what they felt about him. Yes, Stacy.
So is that kind of playing into, you've got a corrupt person in front of you and it makes you very angry. And what do we do about that?
Well, and you know, it's so if it's somebody who's a politician, let's say, there is theoretically the possibility of attacking that person, criticizing them, etc., and exposing them. But of course, if we're not, I just, what I see right now, and you know, I spent a good portion of my life in Chicago with Chicago politics, etc., where at one time, really the what they call the outfit here, the, you know, old style gangsters, they basically ran the city, you know, and so corruption was just considered, oh, you know, that's the Chicago way. It's how it is. You just live with it, and maybe you can get a few favors yourself if you know the right people, and you know, the usual stuff. But I never thought that I would see, and in Chicago we have our local politicians are called aldermen. We have 50 wards in Chicago. Each one has an alder person. And they were always corrupt, most of them, very corrupt. And I never thought that I would say the same thing about politicians on the federal level, but that's how they appear to me. They just appear like Chicago aldermen that I knew from, you know, the past, and still today there's a good deal of it. So I guess we got to stop, right? Are we?
What time have we got here? 6:52. Well, we can keep going until somebody shows up.
Okay. Let me from that. Let me just go to one more quick. Okay. There we go. So I'll just take really. I was going to go over shame, which is the other emotion which you get into when you're in a deeper part of a depression. Depression may start with anxiety, anger, sadness, shame. And then as you sink deeper into it, it's going to be much more sadness and shame. So shame is caused by disrespect. And again, the way I define disrespect is violence, threats of violence or abandonment, and attacking a person's identity. If we get disrespected, we're going to probably feel shame, which will then quickly morph for most people into anger. So you get a very quick, that makes me feel shame, then I get angry. So disrespect can trigger shame, and also the failure to meet internalized standards. And I say disrespect is managed by setting appropriate boundaries, which I discussed earlier, some of that. We have to set boundaries on disrespect. And if we can't get someone to respect us, we need to get away from them. And that's sometimes all we can do. And there's some other things too. But so the other thing that causes shame is failure to meet internalized standards. And shame is basically triggers an urge to hide, to protect ourselves. And the kind of ideation that we get with shame is abandonment ideation and or persecution ideation. Abandonment ideation, you know, I'm inferior, who would want to be with me? Persecution ideation, I'm inferior and will be ridiculed, humiliated, or physically attacked. These thoughts are associated with shame, and they're there to urge us to hide. So let me see, is this, where's, okay, here's a shame timeout. Now, again, if we're being disrespected and that's triggering the shame, we set boundaries. If it's an internalized standard, we have to ask ourselves, is the internalized standard that triggered the shame realistic and or compatible with our moral code? If the answer to that is no, it's not a realistic standard, or it's not something that I consider to be ethically, morally appropriate, then I'm going to have to get rid of that. And hopefully it's not a belief, but a lot of times it will be a belief, and you've got to really work to disregard it, to unload it. If the answer is yes, it's something which could be achieved, and I consider it morally, ethically to be okay, then I need to formulate a plan of action to meet that standard or expectation. That's it. You know, if it's disrespect, learn to set the boundary on the disrespect, or if necessary, to move away from that person or the situation. If it's an internal, you know, I usually use the example, you know, that at this point in time, given that I'm a senior, I do not have capacities and strengths and a lot of that I used to have when I was in my 20s. And I cannot, or, you know, I can't hold myself up to standards that may or may not have been appropriate when I was young. I need to let that go. It's pointless at the, you know, when we get older. I mean, it's just, and we have to be able to make that transition. A lot of times when people go into, you know, their 40s and they're starting to, you know, kind of change from being young to being older, it's a very difficult thing because those standards, you know, well, I could do that, or it was easier not that long ago, but now it's getting difficult. I can't perform. I can't be the way I was when I was young. And so we have to manage the emotions. Now, so when you're in a depression and you get to a point where you're being flooded with sadness and shame, it's necessary to manage both of those emotions and to know where you're at and to try to prevent yourself from crystallizing, you know, beliefs like I need to commit suicide. It's unbearable. And let me just, since we go down one more here. So here are shame-generated beliefs. I am weak. I'm unlovable. I'm inferior. I can't do anything right. Nobody could possibly like or respect me. People want to ridicule and humiliate me. And by the way, when people become psychotic, most of what they're experiencing, a big portion of it, has to do with shame. You know, paranoia is usually pretty much persecutory kind of shame thoughts. And so, you know, again, it's important to know where you're at and what you have to do to take yourself out of it. And the final thing I'll say is, and I maybe next week or at some point I could do something on medication because medication, psychiatric medications, whether they're from a primary care physician or not, it just simply, they will just partially anesthetize the pain, and that's all they do. Okay, I guess we're done for today. Moving into second shift here.
Yes, but you can go ahead and wrap up if you have a summary for us, talking about the causes and the solution for the depression.
Yeah, so usually, just to recap, when somebody starts to go into what's going to be categorized as a clinical depression, they will be experiencing negative emotions, usually a mix which rolls of anger, anxiety, sadness, and shame. As they become more caught in the quicksand of the condition, they will be experiencing much more of shame and sadness. Eventually, you know, the anger will be very muted, the anxiety will be muted, and they're going to be trapped in sadness and shame. And when that happens, it's very dangerous because you can start to form beliefs which are not easily dispensed with. And that's what we encounter in mental health situations. Usually people have crystallized beliefs off of spending a lot of time in certain emotional states. And in order to get rid of those beliefs, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I would just say that, you know, again, managing all of the emotions, knowing how to effectively set boundaries, and to make sure that you have your environment in a way which allows your human needs to be taken care of. If you have all of that, you have those skill sets, and you have the appropriate environment, you should, except with the exception of very few people who really are suffering from organic neurological types of problems, you would not need any psychiatric medication. You could take it if you wanted to, good if you want it, but you would not need it. And I just think that those are some important things to understand. Okay, thank you very much, Stacy, for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much. We did go over a lot of things that people can do when they're experiencing shame or sadness and depression to manage those feelings. And I really appreciate that. And I would very much like to discuss the medications for depression next week if we can do that. So thank you so much for another one, Dan. And I'm going to end the recording here.